Hello, welcome. I am Tmzoids, your host today. First things first, I wanted to apologize yet again for this OBS thing. It's basically one straight cut. I am not using any Windows Media Movie Maker or anything of that sort to make my videos. I'm using OBS, one straight cut. If I mess up 20 minutes in, I redo the whole thing and go at it again. So I apologize. I am working to get a program to edit it so there's much smoother cut, a fade or something in between the intro and me. I'm doing my best though. What do I have right now? But I will be taking a 360 from what I talked about last time. I talked about Team Liquid and the benching of Piglet and how everybody needs to kind of get off Phoenix's back. As we mentioned in that video, there's team dynamic, stepping stools. You have to address your biggest problem or what you feel like your biggest problem is, and then work your way up the ladder to address other problems within the team one way or another. But today I'm going to be taking a 360 on the whole topic, and I'll be actually talking about Team Coast and the benching of Jesiz. This benching kind of got overlooked in week 5 because of the simple fact we had two big names kind of either step down or benched for whatever reason. You had Elements bench or Wicket step down from Elements, which also got a lot of traction and heat because he's played with Froggen for 3 years. He's been in the pro scene for a long time, and he's been considered one of the best top lanes in EU. And then, of course, you had the world champion being benched. Team Liquid benching a world champion. How? Why? This week they went 1-1 with Keith. A lot of people were like, look, they lost. See? And I could probably use the same thing here. Look, they lost. ManCloud didn't do anything. But I'll address that in a little bit, but those were two big ones. But Coast seems as they are a newer team, and seems that they got kind of overlooked on their benching. Yes, there was comments and people noticed it, and it did reach a few of the front pages of Reddit and of course the forums. But ultimately, it was not as big of a topic, of course, because Jesiz is just somebody that made it to Worlds, never won a World Championship. Coast is really a relatively new team still. But there's a lot that I need to talk about, and I think it's just fair to just go right into it and talk about Jesiz. So Jesiz comes from EU. And EU's known for their mid lanes. As you can see, you have Birgisen that came from EU, being an amazing mid laner. Nobody really can compete with him right now in the mid lane. People can argue that Wei Zhao Wei, or Zhao Wei Zhao, sorry, could compete with him. And you also have, I guess, at times Link can compete with him high if he's at his best, and I mean at his very best. And of course, you could also argue and say that Shifter at his best can put Birgisen in a tough situation. But Birgisen being the top mid laner for NA and being one of the mid laners that came from EU, you have also great mid laners like Xpeke and Alex Ich at one time. And you have, of course, the legendary Froggen, give him Nivea, and there, lo and behold, he can carry a game with the bird itself. It didn't go so hot this season, or this split, I should say, but ultimately it was okay. But so Jesiz comes from SK, and I think we have to go back and backtrack a little bit. We want to go back to, I'm not going to go all the way back to their season, or their season split that they ran. But I'm going to go back to the EU playoffs. EU playoffs, a lot of journalists and analysts said right off the bat, SK in Europe looked like the best team. They looked better than Alliance. They looked better than Fnatic. Of course, they got upset and they lost to Alliance. Or not Alliance. They lost to, yes, Alliance. They came in second. So they lost to Alliance. And ultimately, it was just because they were a better team, whatnot. People could argue the pros and cons of that. But SK looking strong. Steven Sirenskin being a great jungler. Jesiz is doing an amazing job as a mid laner, and that's where I wanted to focus on. Now, when you type Jesiz in the search bar in Google, you're not going to get anything. But if you type Jesiz good, all you get is his highlights from EU split. And his highlights of doing all the great things, and nobody really talking about how Jesiz has held his own. Unlike SK's Fox right now, who gets actually a lot of compliments and praise, and he says, he's holding his own, he's doing what he's supposed to be doing, and ultimately a good addition to the team. Jesiz on the other side gets a lot of hate. And that's how the esports works. It's just like pro wrestling in my head. I see it as that way. You're either loved or you're hated, and that's how it works in pro wrestling. You're either the babyface, which is the good guys, and everybody's like cheering for you to win, kind of like Hulk Hogan at one point in time, or you're the face and the bad guy, and that could be multiple people in wrestling. It just depends who you think is a bad guy at the time or who they make as a bad guy. And Jesiz kind of gets that hate. You type in Jesiz sucks in Google, and there's a bunch of comments. Jesiz can only play 2 champions. Jesiz just is not a good mid laner. He can't compete. He needs to be kicked off the team. Jesiz sucks. I mean, this is ongoing, and I can see why social media can get to people and why all the negative comments can get to people. And the same thing goes for YouTubers and everything else. It just gets to you. For every 10 good comments, one negative comment can just absolutely just destroy all those good comments, because it's like, wow, there's that one person that just truly hates me. But he's gotten a lot of hate, and he's had a lot of hate, and it goes back to what his Worlds. Worlds, he had a media core kind of performance. He didn't do too hot. He didn't show the world that he was one of the best mid laners that should be there right now. And a lot of people can argue that Steven Sirenskin getting the ban for 3 games right off the bat did not help. They had to use the substitute jungler from Unicorns of Love, who literally had 1 day of scrimming, 1 day of practice with SK, and Steven Sirenskin held and helped Jesiz as being a mid laner. But I found this ludicrous and find this just crazy that Jesiz was known to play 2 champions. I mean, he's played multiple champions on Coast, and he's played multiple champions in SK, and I just don't see how this can be true. I mean, looking back at his SK games during the year, I'm not going into great detail, like I said, but he's played Kayle, he's played Ahri, he's played LeBlanc, he's played Xerath. I mean, these are I guess the main champions of the time in mid, and he's done a successful job. He's been strong. He's been very consistent mid. And it just blows my mind that people give him so much hate, and he just falls into the bandwagon of being a hated, pro player. And then again, he had to take up the shoes of SK Ocelot, the great mid laner at one time for SK. And I think he did a great job during his split in SK. And he did great in the EU LCS championships. I mean, they were great. They were on fire. They were doing good. At Worlds, it's another step. People don't understand. You make it to LCS is one thing. You're playing against the same people so many times. You can only judge yourself so good. But if you make it to Worlds, it's a whole nother level. You're getting the best of the best from everywhere. The best from NA, the best from EU, the best from Korea, the best from China. I was going to say Japan, I apologize. But best from China. You're getting these people from all over the world, the best of the best mid laners. And everybody has a different team dynamic. You have limited times to scrim, and as everybody knows, scrimming is nothing. Scrimming does not indicate how good or how bad you'll do in the actual LCS, believe it or not. I feel like I'm like going into the camera. I apologize. So I'm going to sit back a bit. But Jesiz kind of had a mediocre, as I said, or subpar placement at Worlds. They didn't do too hot overall. They didn't go out of group stages, and that was, once again, you could argue for the jungler's sake. Steven Sirenskin getting the three game ban, and just things had to readjust with a new jungler, and it was very hard. And this was Jez's first time in the world stage. A lot of those people have been to the world stage before, Xpeke being one of them, who's been to Worlds multiple times, facing the best of the best. You had people from even who won, Samsung, White, mid laners the year before, won, or were trying to win. They didn't lost. This year they won. They were there again. They've had this experience. They've had this time to practice and have these nerves and overcome these nerves and kind of know what it's like. And Jez's first time, I mean, he held his own. He didn't do the best. He kind of looked mediocre. And then, of course, then boom, all the teams change up, and Jez's ends up leaving SK and going to Coast. Now, I wanted to talk about ManCloud before I actually talk about Coast. So, Before I get off of Jesiz, though, Jesiz, I've watched a few games of Jesiz. I'm not a big Coast fan, but I did watch this just for this video. And I'm going to take two games, one being the Cloud9 game, where High has been struggling, as we know, in the mid lane, and he's been struggling for a whole bunch of other reasons. You know, he's the shot caller, he's the main caller for the team, like I said, shot caller, once again. And he's just been struggling in mid and not doing as best as he could. Now, Jesiz was playing Xerath at the time against Cloud9, and he, an analysis will tell you this. He was more of a utility pick. He's not really one to carry the team, but that's what his role was in Coast. It's a completely different role than he had in SK, which you have to keep in mind. They're two different things. Jesiz is more an aggressive jungler, has to be carry, or not jungler, more aggressive mid, and that has to carry in SK, or being one of the carries in SK at the time, doing good. And then you have him now in the NA side, more of just going even out of his lane, more of the utility. I'm here to bring, the CC, the damage, but I'm not really going to be the one that puts me on the shoulders and carries, like Bjergsen. Bjergsen, I can't give you a better example than that. Bjergsen pretty much has a huge backpack for TSM right now. Everybody gets in. Wild Turtle is kind of like more of like Pikachu on the side right now. And he's like, all right, Pikachu, go in, you do your damage, and I'm here to carry, ultimately. That's not Jez's rolling coast. Like I said, Jez though went up against one of the best mids in EU and should be doing better. I don't disagree. He should be coming in as strong, if not stronger, than most mid laners here in the EU or the NA, and that is not the case. He's gone up against Expeke, like I said, against Froggen. He's gone against Overpow. He's gone against Nick Q. These are exceptionally good mids. Maybe not best as back in the day, or as some could argue, but these are exceptionally good mids. EU's known for being great, having great mid laners and having great mid play. And Jesiz comes to Coast, and he's more of a, he's coming even out of his lane. Maybe he's ahead of kill, and maybe he's ahead in CS, or just even in CS, but really nothing too much. But going back to the game, he was playing Xerath, High and him really didn't do much. He did get one kill. It was more of a pick than a kill. He was just poking and not using too much of an advantage on Cloud9. And keep in mind, Cloud9's still struggling at this point when they're facing Coast. And Jesiz comes out of his lane even. He's keeping up with CS and High. He's keeping up, just ultimately doesn't die. He's playing very safe. And ultimately, his team is doing really good too. Like I said, I'll talk about that in a little bit. But Jesiz ends the game 1-0 in like 3. Didn't really do anything. He couldn't really carry. And analysis told you right off the bat there. The coaches, the analysis, or players can say, Jez is not one to carry. The team dynamic that he's holding right now is more of a utility. He's more of a mid player who's just there to do damage, but he's not ultimately one that's going to carry your team. And he couldn't do anything anyway because his other lanes kind of got collapsed on and got caught out and just picked off, and Cloud9 ultimately won and pushed their way to the victory. Now, using a different game, they're one of their last games where they face CLG, which is more of a top team, where he's going against Link. Once again, he's keeping up with Link in CS. This is important. He's not roaming. He's playing LeBlanc now. He's playing LeBlanc against Italy. And this is a very different dynamic because he should be carrying more. He's not more of a utility. He's more like a burst in, poke somebody out, and then hopefully make it a 4v5 or get a kill if things go really good. Coast were ahead in both of these games, pretty much ahead. They outplayed their opponents. They got a good lead in the beginning, especially in the Cloud9 game. They were ahead. And same thing with here. Link and him both go out of laning phase 0-0-0. Link didn't roam. Jesiz didn't roam. He didn't capitalize really too much on the Nidalee and couldn't explode her. That's fine. Link, vice versa, he kept up. And I think at one time, Link was, leading Jesiz in about 10 CS, give or take, 10 to 20. But we'll talk about that in a second. But ultimately, Jez is keeping up, he's keeping farmed, and he went out even in his lane. He didn't die, he didn't get a kill, and he didn't get really any assists. Well, once again, Coast goes under pressure. CLG start getting their steam rolling. They're getting this slow advantage. They're picking people off. And Jesiz is one to now actually have a negative KDA in this game. he doesn't do too hot. But he goes in, he can't assassinate anybody. It was kind of sloppy, I agree. It wasn't the best LeBlanc game, but he did what he was supposed to do. He went in, he burst somebody down as best as he could as LeBlanc, and it just wasn't enough. His team couldn't capitalize. He got hit by spears. He ended up dying at one time. CLG, being a top team, ends up doing exceptionally well, and he ends up losing that game. They lose again, Coast. Because, like I said, they have this early game advantage. Something does really well, and I can tell you right off the bat, Chris outplayed Zion Spartan in that game. And with Irelia, they were down bottom. They outplayed them. The jungler came in for a counter gank. They turned it around. They got first blood. It was amazing, and it shouldn't have been a problem. But once again, things aren't going so well, and we'll talk about that, like I said, towards the end. I want to talk about ManCloud. ManCloud brings a different perspective to the team. ManCloud's a little bit more aggressive. He brings more of a fighting kind of, I want to carry this kind of game response to the team, and I guess that's what they wanted to do. Now keep in mind, just like in the other video, because you swap somebody out doesn't mean automatically that's going to change everything. Yes, either swaps go either way. They're 50-50 chance. You flip a coin. Either you swap somebody out and it does really good, or it does really badly. And the perfect example would be Wicked. Wicked stepped down, but ultimately Alliance still has the same problems that it has. They are speculating now they're going to get rid of Nymph, the underperforming Nymph, and do stuff with that. But that's not what this video is about. That's for a different time. But ultimately, they swapped him out. Kevin came in. Kevin played a solid first game. His second game was okay, not as good. But ultimately, they lose again. They're just not doing well. So, with Coast, you go to these games, and this is why I waited to make this video, so I could see and watch both games. ManCloud first playing against TSM, which is a great game. Great game. He's playing Zed against an Ahri, which is understandable. ManCloud's kind of champion, and he gets 6. He's been poked down. He gets outplayed by Bjergsen, which is no surprise. Bjergsen being one of your top mid laners, like I said, in NA right now. Gets outplayed, gives first blood, which is not good. So now he's 0-1, and he's keeping up with. He's actually ahead in CS with Bjergsen. He's ahead on Zed, which is pretty impressive. Ultimately, he goes in, he can't assassinate anybody. He's had the same problem that Jesiz had the week before on LeBlanc. He would Zed ult somebody, he's building correctly, he's doing what he's supposed to be doing for the champion. He would ult maybe not the correct person, but he would ult somebody, he'd go in, Bjergsen hit that clutch charm. There's a replay of it where he hits the clutch charm when Zed comes right out of his ult, so he can't jump back to his shadow, and holy moly, he's now 0-2. So then he's 0-2, ultimately goes 0-3. They end up surrendering the game. There you get pounded. This week they're not doing so good in gold advantages. They can't even get the early game lead that they were getting before. TSM kind of just steamrolls ahead, being one of the top teams. It's not surprising, but ManCloud's struggling. He was ahead in CS, but ultimately getting outplayed by Bjergsen, and ultimately losing the game, surrendering early, and had no effect. He had no assist. He died 3 times, and he didn't do anything. But he was using his style. That's his style. He's more aggressive. He goes in for the plays. He wants to be a playmaker. So game 2, they are against Team 8, which are 2 bottom teams, Team Coast and Team 8. And ManCloud goes in against Slushi, and you had ManCloud play Ahri versus LeBlanc. Another great matchup for him, another assassin, a good favorable pick. And Slushi getting first blood, diving him a solo kill on the tower, killing ManCloud, giving up, I think, first blood again, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So now ManCloud's down again. He's doing the best he can. He actually becomes even. He's a little bit more involved. He's 2-2-3, I think, at one point in the game. They capitalize. I mean, Slushi's now fed. He's nuking people. Slushi ends the game like 8-0 or 9-0, and just nuking anybody and kind of carrying the team on his back, kind of like TSM style. And ManCloud ends up going 2-3 and like 2, or 2-3 and 3, something to that extent. And Team Coast goes 0-2 again. As you can see, one again, Coast swapping somebody out does not justify and ultimately giving them a win, as we've seen with multiple other teams. Now, that being said, ManCloud and Jesiz. Who would I pick and why? Well, if you use both of them and using their past experiences, they're about even. When it comes to skill and what they bring to a team, it depends on what you want for the team. They both mesh in different ways. Like I said, Jesiz is more of a utility mid. He uses a mid player not to really carry, but to kind of put out the damage, do the CC. You know, you pick your Xerath, and you pick your LeBlanc. You know, if you can nuke somebody out and make it a 4v5, or Xerath with their long range and kind of pick people off, that's great. That's what Jesiz does. If you want more of an aggressive, all-in kind of guy, do damage, fight, make plays, you want ManCloud. But ultimately, you cannot justify that ManCloud's any better or any worse than Jesiz. They're about equally the same in skill, and they all bring their pros and cons to the game. ManCloud having a rough week one coming into the game, but it takes time for the team to adjust. But which it brings me into the topic, though, of Team Coast. Now, Team Coast, I saw this a few times, and people will probably disagree with me, but that's okay. That Team Coast, because, like I said before, there's a lot of hate for Jesiz. Jesiz is on the, Jesiz sucks. Jesiz is not good. He can only play 2 champions, and that's fine. But Team Coast is a relatively new team, and they go through a lot of changes, and they have a lot of problems within the team. Unlike Team Liquid, who's trying to adjust these problems and trying to work them out as a team and trying to build and get rid of this toxicity and work on communication. Team Coast is not doing this. They have poor management. They keep swapping players in and out. As soon as something goes wrong, you see them kick a player out thinking that will ultimately fix something. And like I said before, it's a 50-50 chance, because you swap somebody out doesn't mean ultimately everything's gone and everything's better. I think there's no leadership in coach. They need a better coaching staff. They need ultimately a better analysis, somebody to lead them, because they have great players. Let me explain something to you with Coast before I go into their history a little bit. Oh, and before I forget, I pulled up the games, the Jesiz games, compared to Bjergsen in the LCS, using the Fantasy LCS, their KDAs and whatnot. I got at this before Bjergsen played his other 2 games, because Jesiz sat out this week. And just to give you an example, out of the 8 games, of course, Bjergsen's ahead of him in kills, which is retrospectively. So Bjergsen also is going to have less deaths, which is also expected because Bjergsen is the main carry. So Bjergsen overall has 53 kills to Jez's 19 kills in the LCS right now, because, like I said, he's more of a utility jungler. He's there for damage and whatnot. Deaths, Jez usually plays pretty safe. I mean, there are some games where he gets completely stomped and dies, which is understandable. Bjergsen has 10 deaths within week 8. That might change, of course, after the next 2 games, of course. And Jez has had 21 deaths over the last 4 weeks, which is a lot. I understand. He's actually negative KDA by a few kills. But his assist, Bjergsen has 53 assists, which is, once again, understandable, being the top mid, or being one of the top mids in NA. And Jesiz had 36. Jesiz had 36. He was involved with the team. It wasn't like he was doing his own thing. He was doing the part what he was supposed to do, and ultimately having more assists than kills by a whole ton, and that's usually the case. But even when I was looking at Link and looking at other players, consistently, Link had a high amount of deaths, around the same amount of deaths and average deaths, and a lot of the mids had an average death of about 20 kills, maybe 15 to 20 kills, give or take, depending who you were looking at. Assist, he was really close with Link. He, I think, was beating Link in assist. And kills, of course, Link had a lot of kills over him because, like I said, he's more of a utility mid. But CS is what I want to talk about, and because I think they get lost, you guys kind of don't look at the CS and why that's a big advantage, is that he never really falls behind. And out of 8 games, week 4, Jesiz had 2,323 CS to Bjergsen's 2,343. He was 100 CS short of Bjergsen, the top mid. If you're coming out of your lane up ahead in CS or even in CS and don't have kills or assists, this is good because you're both at the same thing. And like I mentioned with the Link game, they both came out of the laning phase 0-0 and 0. None of them had assists, none of them had kills. Ultimately, they both get a kill throughout the game. Ultimately, CLG comes and steamrolls ahead, and Jesiz ends up dying a little bit more than Link, and going, I think, 1 in 3 at the end of the game, because he gets hit with a few spears and just can't nuke anybody, and he's trying the best he could, but he couldn't really pull a full combo off that game, ultimately losing the game. But he's keeping up in CS. He's doing what he's supposed to be doing. He's not getting as stomped as most people do. I'm not saying he's the best of the best mids. Like I said, he probably cannot compete with Bjergsen. He could probably get outplayed, but he's being consistent. He's being what he is to the team. Now back to what I was saying of Coast. Coast needs a coaching perspective. They need a better analysis. They need more leadership within here because they have a great team. Chris being in their top lane, Chris is outplayed, done successful in his lane, even gone ahead, outfarmed one of your better top laners. He, like I said, he outplayed Zion Spartan and got the first blood there with it in Paler, which is their jungler. There's actually a tweet the other day that MYM should have given up Impaler. They're gonna bite themselves in the ass if they gave up Impaler. And Impaler has been doing an impressive job in the jungler. I think he's underlooked, and maybe not. Like I said, can't compete with the top of the teams with Smithy and Santorin right now. But he's doing his early ganks aggressiveness, has gotten a lot of first bloods and gotten a lot of lane steamrolling, and it's just good. ManCloud now is the mid lane, of course. We've already talked about him. And then Sheep and Don't Mash Me are in the bot lane. They're probably not the strongest bot lane, but they're consistent bot lane. There's nothing wrong with their bot lane. You can get them ahead. Don't Mash Me was ahead many times, and Sheep is a very good support. Both these people, I think, are underrated and not liked for one reason or another. And Team Coast ultimately has a great team. A great, great, great team. And it just seems like this is probably one of their strongest teams right now when it comes to looking at Coast's past. And for having such a good team, in my opinion, and a strong team that you have, you need just a good coaching, a good analysis for the team to get them on the right track, and that's all they really need. But see, Coast has a lot of issues that they want to kick and sit people right off the bat when something goes bad. That's not the way to do it. I know I mentioned that subs are important to the game, but ultimately you do not want to just give up on your team altogether and just rework things, because that changes the team dynamic. It changes how everything needs to be played and done. Because like I said, Jez is a completely different mid than ManCloud. ManCloud, like I said, is more aggressive. He wants to go in there. He wants to be the playmaker. He's been in the LCS just like Jesiz. They both have probably the same experience. Jesiz being at the Worlds once, having a little bit more experience, having a mediocre ordeal. But Jesiz is more utility, brings the damage, CC to the fight, not ultimately going to carry your team. Now, looking at the timeline with Coast, there has been a lot of changes to this team. You had all these people join Team Coast in 2013. They've gotten different sponsors for Team Coast, of course, but we're not going to do that. But Don't Mash Me actually leaves Coast in 2013. He actually comes back as Mash. And then you had WizFusion join back in 2013. You had Elements leave as the coach, because he was the coach for Team Coast. In 2014, going forward ahead, you had Alex Penn, which is a great coach and analysis. He could be really good. Join the team. Later on, they placed 6th place in the 2014 LNA LCS. Shifter and Zion Spartan leave, so keep in mind those are two really good players, in my opinion. Shifter doing a great job in Dignitas, and Zion Spartan doing a good job in the top lane CLG. Santorin joins the Team Coast as a starting jungler with Nintendo X moved to the sub position. See, they keep changing people out. And then they announced a whole new roster in June 9th. Announcing Don't Mash Me, Sheep, joins, while Daydream and WizFusion moves to sub. And KX joins as a coach. Yes, KX, you don't have to forget KX. Then KX steps down as a team coach for Coast. So there's a lot of intertwined problems here. I can go on here. Sheep leaves Team Coast. Sheep, of course, coming back to Coast. Elements coming back to as a coach. We Will Failure joined as a coach. Um, just all kinds of things. You know, they got rid of Santorin, and LOD leave Team Coast. Santorin ultimately going to TSM. But just it just so much stuff has happened and a lot of intertwined problems within Coast really affects the gameplay, and it makes me sad that such a strong team, and you do have a strong team, like I said, Chris and the bot lane ultimately outplaying their opponents at times. Jungle and Paler doing a great job in the jungle, creating early pressure, creating first bloods, creating an early lead for their lanes. These are things that are great. Sometimes they don't always work out. I know, I understand that. There are games where Coast dived and didn't do so hot. They got a little overconfident. But if they had an analysis, if they had the proper coaching, they had the proper leadership within this team right now, I believe that they could. They can fight Curse. They can fight these middle teams to at least get in the top 5. Maybe even top 6 if things are, well, things are kind of late now, so maybe top 6. But you can take this team, they can win again. If they're in the relegation, they have to go back to Challenger Series. They can go through the Challenger Series, come back, and do it again. I don't think that Jesiz being was benched was the proper thing to do. I think that Team Coast likes to do this. They like to sit people, bench people all the time, change people out, and ultimately hope for like this super team that just automatically creates and just ultimately clicks. I believe that these players do click together. I think they have great synergy together, even with Jesiz or ManCloud, whatever you decide to do. But it was unjustifiable to sit Jesiz, in my opinion. I think, like I said, if you got the proper analysis, if you get the proper coach, Team Coast can ultimately do great things with this team. You don't have to keep benching people. You don't have to keep swapping people out using different subs. If you just figured out your internal problems with the proper coaching and the people staying and leaving the team all the time, and you had somebody that was really dedicated and somebody that wanted Team Coast to succeed and be one strong, all unified team, I think this team can do it. Jez's being a utility did not affect the team as much. I feel like he, like I said, he came out even, if not ahead in CS at times in games. He didn't really die. He didn't put his team in any kind of danger. He didn't really play make, unlike ManCloud, who's more of a playmaker and more aggressive, but he did bring that aspect of the game. He came from EU. I'm not saying that's a reason to keep him because he comes from EU and EU is known for mid laners, but he was fighting the best of the best mids. He was holding his own there, playing different champions, just completely outplaying people there. Yes, things I understand things can change over time also. But, going into the EU LCS championships, being one of the analysts stating that they looked like they're the best teams and ultimately were the best team, even though they lost and came in second. But I think this was overlooked. Not a lot of people are talking about this, and it is a problem to address. I mean, Team Coast shouldn't just constantly bench people and constantly sub people out, thinking that maybe one time or another time they swap somebody out that ultimately everything will go away. Things will just automatically mash together, and no pun intended, by the way, and do great things. But that is it. That is all. I apologize for ranting for a long time. I just felt like Jezz deserved some noticeability, somebody that actually respect him as a mid laner and not all this hate and hatred and heat that he gets all the time that you see on Reddit and other places. So, thank you all. I appreciate it. I am Tmzoids, and that is it. Bye, guys.